Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 6 of the Climate Pioneers Show. Throughout the course of this series so far, we have been discussing the challenges around scaling deep tech solutions within climate. I've been speaking to investors, to founders, venture builders, and other key ecosystem players who are all focused on the same common goal: scaling and commercializing groundbreaking deep tech innovations. We've been exploring how to prepare for the challenges that deep tech companies often uniquely face around fundraising, team building, and commercializing. And we've been hearing stories from those who have successfully scaled to Series A and beyond. So whether you're a founder yourself embarking upon that startup to scale up journey, maybe you're an investor looking at deep tech as a potential investment area, or maybe you're just somebody that's passionate about climate innovation. Whatever your background, whatever your motivations, there should be something for you in this series. And today I am joined by Francesco Perticarari, General Partner at Silicon Roundabout Ventures, a super angel for pre-seed and seed stage deep tech companies. So Francesco, thank you so much for joining me.
No, that's all right. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And so I often start off these episodes by hearing about individuals' journeys, because recruitment's what I do, careers are my thing. I love hearing about people's journeys and how they ended up where they are today. And yours was particularly interesting, how you went from computer science and software engineering to investment. So are you happy to share with us that journey and how that evolved?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been a lot of twists and turns. And if you told me 10 years ago actually more now, 12 years ago, when I moved from Italy to the UK to work as a software engineer and, keep studying computer science, that I would end up in venture capital, I would have answered, what is venture capital? I didn't have any clue. But what happened was that I joined forces with couple of guys who had started this meetup, and we ended up basically co-founding it all together and growing it. And then for various reasons, in the end, I was sort of left alone, to run this community over the last few years. And by that point, basically this community of engineers and scientists and founders eventually had morphed into this sort of startup founders friendly community where and basically through that journey of building this community and meeting lots of founders early stage, I had come to the realization that that there was a lot of potential from especially technical founders in highly technical companies in Europe to build extremely successful companies on one side, and on the other side actually have a tremendous impact, because they wouldn't be just a B2B SaaS app, but they would actually solve securities, computing challenges, climate, energy challenges, and most of these companies actually had hardware, which until very recently was almost a bad word or a swear in investor land. And so I started investing as an angel, and then that led me into realizing that I wanted to focus full time on the community and the fund, and on the investment. And I married the two by launching this for now, small fund. I'm a solo GP, and I'm writing, like you mentioned, super angel style checks into companies, either as a very first check or the sort of first institutional round type of thing. And the focus is all on deep tech, advanced engineering companies, science-driven companies.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay. So, and tell us a bit more about the community itself, because you said community, and I think you underplayed it, because it was a pretty significant community, right? It was like, tell us what you built on the community side.
Yeah, so it's all started out from this meetup group, which as of now it's nearly 15,000 people. Although recently we've been expanding, I guess, thanks to COVID in a way, blessed in disguise, expanding through the whole of Europe in terms of people signing up to our newsletters, checking our events, and obviously now with the fund, we're trying to also expand even more, and the idea is that as the community grows, the fund grows, and that would provide the business engine and resources over time. I mean, right now the fund is so small, it's a 5 million fund that it barely covered its costs. I remember I started it, and now I can finally say, because as I said it before, some people would have killed me for it, but I started paying the first fees to launch the fund on a personal loan, and and it was a bit of a crazy jump, because I didn't even know I would close the fund and be able to repay. But here we are today. And so as it grows, the two things, the sort of thousands of engineers and founders that keep following us, and it's as simple as signing up to our newsletter and then coming to our events if they want. And then we're doing now, for example, a deep tech demo day, which is fully online, so everybody in Europe can join. And then we invite them to come to London to meet investors in person. And so again, it's very collective. I'm an investor. I like to take early bets into companies, but I know I'm not alone. And actually, we need more, I believe, deep tech investors that cover the whole spectrum from climate to computing to bioscience and stuff, because even one or even 10 investors are not enough. And so in the US there are like hundreds of deep tech investors now that do anything from defense to computing and climate. And I think in Europe we need to at least mirror that, in if not going even deeper.
Absolutely. And why particularly do you believe deep tech is such a great investment strategy, and one where we should be putting a lot more investment money into? Why is it so great?
Loads of reasons, but I would say top three would probably be one, because it basically has created for itself a bad reputation in the investment world, but actually it's all lies. For instance, people say, oh, it takes forever to exit. Actually, up until the post-dot-com bubble and bust, maybe not all, but the majority of VC-backed companies and successful exits were in semiconductors, infrastructure. Think of NVIDIA, founded in the 90s, Amazon, and even before that, semiconductor companies like like Intel and Apple and
NVIDIA,
hardware companies, right? And they all exited on a reasonable time scale. The problem was actually what happened within creation of growth capital. Investors wanted to deploy a lot of money into what was a tiny boutique industry, the early venture capital funds. I mean, even Sequoia, that today is like probably one of the most known names and biggest funds, started with a $5 or $8 million fund, so similar size to mine actually, back in the days. But anyway, so that basically pushed companies to stay private for longer, and that affected both the software and the hardware. Now, it is true that in deep tech it takes longer to commercialization. So the first few years do take longer, but then you look at the actual exit timeline. In reality, the whole venture capital is basically now sort of good exits happening in the sort of 12 to 15, 18, up to 20 years time. And you've got companies like Stripe that still have not really exited and they still stay private. So that's happening across the board. So whilst deep tech is taking longer, in the end it takes the same. But because of that, it's been heavily underfunded in the last 20 years, where all of the hype was on software and B2B SaaS and asset light type of tech. So underfunded and being a little bit neglected, and also people not hiring for the right skills for 2 decades creates an opportunity. The second reason is impact. I mean, we're here talking about climate, and that's just one of the aspects of basically problems that cannot be solved if you just pop up an app. Or even like, even now everybody talks about AI, but if by AI you mean making a few API calls to LLMs provided by OpenAI, and then you basically still do a B2B SaaS app, that's still not going to solve any real problem in climate, no matter how much box ticking you want to do on, I solved the supply chain. No, you don't solve anything, right? You need batteries, you need energy provisions, you need like storage, you need that production. And so the second, obviously, is this impact potential that has both a financial return, because if you solve, say, agricultural, pressing issues, you've got countries like my homeland of Italy, which is completely plagued by, every year worse climate conditions that affect food production. And that's just one example. And then the last is that in Europe specifically, except for maybe fintech in certain areas, we've been always lagging behind venture capital. And there is always this thing of, we need to catch up to the US. But the reality is that the exit market, the liquidity market, there are so many reasons why you cannot just sort of press a button and make it happen. What you could do is to try and figure out areas where you do have an advantage, and where if you provide enough capital and you cooperate with the US, especially growth stage type of venture capital world, then you can create new types of moonshots. And I think, you've got early pioneers like Norvolt in the battery space. They're now proving that that's possible. You can create gigantic type of companies, exit value companies, when they do exit eventually, and potentially going public type of companies. So all of these three reasons, I think, make it extremely compelling. There are many other reasons, but I think, these three, at least, the fact that we have a stronghold in Europe with academia, it can create a tremendous global impact, and both financially and social. And it's been underinvested for so long that actually you can create niches of, basically like arbitrage by going in and being bold on it. that I think makes it at least extremely compelling to at least be exposed to.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so you mentioned there you've just closed your first £5 million solo VC fund. So yeah, that's this like super angel part, I suppose. Having done your own angel investments from your own personal money, you've now raised this £5 million fund to deploy as a super angel, as a fund, essentially, into pre-seed and seed stage deep tech companies in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
How was that experience of raising that fund in this market? Because it's not been I suppose this year maybe a little better than last year, but not been an easy market to raise money in. So how was the journey? What were the challenges? Yeah, tell us.
I mean, both extremely exciting and horrible at the same time. But I guess, well, I can't say that I wasn't warned when I started. A lot of people that were kind enough to spend time with me, even though I was a total newbie that had never worked in the industry, didn't have really many contacts in there other than maybe a few people through the community, were actually quite candid about the fact that it was going to be horrible. It was going to take a lot longer than I expected. And, but so I was warned. But then again, I think very similarly to founders on the other side of the spectrum, if you really believe there is a huge opportunity, both financially and in terms of what the impact you will create, beyond yourself, and you see almost so vividly that you can't stop trying, even if it's hard, then it kept me going. And on the other side, I started to see some early validation from the angel portfolio. Now we have a company. Well, I have a company that is clocking more than 40 million in revenue, and nearly went bust twice and had to pivot a lot of times. But again, the founder, the technology underneath, everything was so right in a way. And I know that these things can go either way. And for one that goes that way, there will be others that will fail. But one thing that I've learned through the community and analyzing what happened to those companies that came to pitch even before I started investing was that, and I know everybody says that, but I don't think everybody really understands what it means. There is an extreme power law at play here, so that you've got a few companies that not only get it right, but the market goes behind them. They've got tailwind, and they effectively create so much value, both again impact and financial value, that they completely outweighed all of the lost bets. And actually, I think somebody from the traditional equity, not private, not venture capital, said in equity investing you can only lose 1x your money, but if you get it right, you can have 10. In that case, I think he mentioned 10, but in venture it can be 100x. And so the fact that I could see some, there was definitely validation in the community. Some companies have failed, but some companies have even hit unicorn status. Now in the angel portfolio, despite some of those investments being happening in the 2020 and 21, started to sort of hit some great milestones. It just kept me going to say, well, I really want to do this full time. I really want to help the community, and I really want to sort of build this firm, not just fund one, which is hard and it's small and everything, but I see it as a first step. So now finally it's there. So yes, horrible, but similar to a lot of founders that have to raise a deep tech round and raise a lot more than a traditional, maybe a tech company, effectively on an idea and very little traction. And yeah, it's good to get to the end of the end of it.
Yeah, hard and horrible, but you've got that like courage of your conviction. You believe in what you're doing, and that kind of carries you through the battle, I guess. Yeah.
And also the people you meet, by the way, that's another thing. Like for hundreds of no's that you get, you also get few yeses. And I feel so privileged that some of these yeses came from like unicorn founders, people that have been in the tech industry for like 20 years, and they're all, seeing the value of this fund. So again, I guess your brain needs to be able to sort of rely on those few yeses and cling on to the fact that some people do believe in your values, and you start to build something with them, and you sort of ignore all the no's and say, okay, well, it's like in sales or in recruitment, for any no, you need to basically say it's a step closer to the next yes.
Yeah, exactly. And now you have that fund to deploy. What are you interested in? What excites you? What problem spaces? What makes a good investment prospect for you?
So at the moment, and this obviously changes as the geopolitics of the world change, but I would say any science-based company that solves a gigantic problem, but can be done, either with hardware, or a mix of hardware and software, and obviously has to be defensible. But more specifically, right now I'm focused a lot in terms of the computing challenges that we face as a species, and obviously the fact that AI right now is consuming a lot of energy that links it into climate. And again, I'm looking at climate solutions. I've done some medical stuff and not yet bio. And to be fair, I feel a lot less strong background-wise and also community-wise in those fields. So the bar there is higher in the sense that not just in terms of what the founders can do and the companies can achieve, but also in terms of making it easier for me to understand and to link into founders, because I do a lot of references in the community to try and understand if a company and what they can become is a big enough of an exit. And then I guess defense. Ukraine is something that has touched me even personally because I've got some friends down there, and I remember I was in the country just before the attack, and since then it made me even change my personal view on how we view the defense world. Right now I'm heavily investing, at least looking. I've actually done a couple of investments in defense and into dual use more broadly, and I'm all encouraging for founders that want to take that path in terms of working also with the defense world. I know it's a bit of a polarizing decision. I have personally changed a lot in terms, before 2022, I would have been like, well, I don't even want to get involved. It's too much of a minefield, no pun intended, to get in, and I don't know where right or wrong is. Right now, unfortunately, we've seen that wrong can come in the form of an invasion of a democratic country, and it affects, millions of lives. And that's just the start. It could happen tomorrow to Taiwan, etc. So I think that it's not for everybody, but if you are a founder that wants to create a company in the space, you actually can bring morality in if you are a person that, wants to stick to their own values. And so I'm happy to back this type of companies and be a voice that shapes the discussion rather than just expecting some other government somewhere else to fix the issue for us, type of thing.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely a contentious sector, but yeah, one where I suppose you have to take each company with their intentions on an individual basis and make your own decision. And to that point around due diligence, as companies kind of come to you, being a solo GP, how do you manage that due diligence process? How much of that do you outsource? Where do you have support on that? And have you got an easy framework for things that are in or out for you?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to mark out are basically companies where I just don't believe they can be big enough. And, even if it's a compelling business case, I just don't see it becoming huge. And obviously that's a lot of personal views based on what I've read and what I talk about and what I so that's what I'm saying. Sometimes you might just make a wrong call, but I try to stick to, and I try to keep expanding the universe of stuff we get comfortable with. But that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is obviously, and alongside that, it needs to be deep tech, it needs to be pre-seed, it needs to be Europe. If you're raising a 10 million round, it's not for me. If you're raising outside for a company in the US, is not for me, or Israel is not for me. There are easy things. And these things, I'm doing them not because I have to buy LPA. I don't have any government money, and I would like to stay away from this type of things that force you too much into geographies or stuff. But it's almost a self-discipline type of decision of, I want to make sure that I can benchmark what I see. And so if you're doing something in a geography where I don't have a strong network, then the question, and there is a lot of capital, then the question is, why do we even see it? Why is it even coming to me? And then, so this is the easy no. Then after that, it's, spending a little bit more time maybe on the deck and doing some research, basically desktop search on, again, topics and things like that. If I have people in my network and I have a lot that I can quickly reference with a WhatsApp or a quick email, I would do so if I start to see there's something there. Again, if I struggle to see the potential of the company to grow big in a given opportunity or market, then again it's a no. At that stage, If that ticks, then I'll look at the founders, from LinkedIn search and what they've done, what their background. And I think a lot of people downplay that. Now it depends, but I'm one of those that says put your team first, which doesn't mean it has to be the first light of the deck. I mean, look, build your deck how you want. I think there is too much advice on building a deck and not enough advice on actually, building a real company. But still, if you just put a phase and there's I would do some search, but make it easy to understand why you're uniquely positioned to build a science-driven tech companies. And that is something I basically check next. And normally if these two things are like, okay, well, there is potential in both, then let's have a call. Then in that call, I try to get the understanding of what's the reason behind building this company, how much the company has already built, what can be protected by IP, and what is the journey to scale. And then the last 2 points are sort of referencing how the scaling can happen in the market, more like referencing type of stuff with people. And lastly, very, very lastly, the tech DD on what the company has built. I leave it last because there are so many reasons, because it's the longest. It takes the longest to me to do, especially in physics-based stuff. And there are so many reasons to say no, from the valuation being too high for my stage. Again, maybe for a bigger fund is perfect, or the team not convincing me, or the market not convincing me, or so many things that I try to leave that last. If I look at the tech DD, so far I've never said no at that point, because in Europe, I think we have the opposite problem of what happened in the US with, say, Theranos. Here people underpitch what they have. So,
Right.
Normally if I get to the point where, okay, like, show me what you've built, let's look deeper into the patents. Again, so far I've never said no, but I try not to do that until I have conviction around, okay, the team has some significant players. By the way, can be a solo founder with people around him or her. I've done that. And the market opportunity feels like one where it can be huge, and huge, I mean, the company, if it's successful, can make 100 million plus in revenue, maybe even more in 10, 20 years time.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And you mentioned Europe specifically, so you're not UK specific, you will invest across Europe, and you talk a lot about why you think Europe has such great potential from a deep tech investment perspective. First of all, why is that? And I suppose as a sort of secondary to that, how advanced do you see the ecosystem for fostering deep tech innovation being in Europe compared to the US? Because I suppose you see across both markets, right? Is Europe well positioned from an ecosystem perspective? Are there still some gaps and things we could be doing better on this side of the pond?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty shit, but a lot less shit than what it was 20 years ago. And I guess this is encouraging because it's moving in the right direction. For the early stage, I think there are now some clusters where, just because by virtue of the cluster being there and governments realizing that they have an asset, things are moving forward. I think it's so draining that I still get dragged, and I recently have been, specifically, I still get dragged into conversations about universities or, spin out companies, trying to get too much equity, not understanding the venture capital game, not optimizing for maximum amount of encouraging entrepreneurship, and instead focusing on every single one to be a battle about trying to take as much as they can. This is so backwards, and unfortunately it's only getting easier in and around London, Cambridge, maybe Munich, like this type of Switzerland, around the sort of Zurich type of ecosystem and cluster, Paris to some extent, but not all universities, not all cities. So there's so much, right? So much to catch up there, and it's unfortunate because the way I see it is like this should be just, if they don't wake up, legislate it away, then we don't have pension funds investing as much as the US again. Then we have fragmentation. It's great, especially for the earliest stages, that governments try to help, but then governments don't really cooperate as much. And so the UK wants to be the word superpower. It will never get there, right? And it's just numbers. But the UK, Germany, France, the biggest economies in Europe, they're like, 3 trillion kind of thing. You just will never be able to compete with the US. And unfortunately, that creates the second problem. So the first problem, I think, is slowly being solved, and we can all participate. I am not one of those that just want to cry and say we're completely screwed. I want to be part of the solution, and I think we can continue to work on it, and we are working as a European tech community collectively. The exit stage is still challenging. So right now, I still advise my founders, at the moment you close this round, go to the US, start to raise money there. And not just US, by the way. I got a founder that recently got a term sheet from Asia, and that term sheet then started to trigger lots of term sheets all over the rest of the planet, including here. And it's crazy because, right, it's like I've been telling other investors, bigger investors, about this person way back in last year, and it took their guts to go around the world to get term sheets to then trigger the local investors. To me, that's insane. And by the way, obviously the local ones will lose out at this point. Too slow, right? So the point is, on that front, on growth, I think the problem is that you just cannot fully crack it internally. And so it's so great that the US, the UK, for example, or Germany, they're trying to do some legislation to move some pension funds. Actually, even Italy is doing something like that, weirdly enough. A friend of mine is working on that, which is good. But the point is that they're all small. And so if we don't start to accept that a unicorn, and by the way, not just unicorn, a titanic company that grows and can acquire other companies that can create follow-on angels in Germany is just as good to the UK ecosystem as one here for the German ecosystem, and vice versa. We're all limited. We're limited because our regional boundaries is like if, Minnesota tried to be the leading, global superpower, and, it's not happening, right? We look at the US as a single thing, and then obviously Silicon Valley is a lot bigger than others, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need to try and facilitate people helping each other here so that we're less jealous. And obviously, we've got 3-4 stock exchanges. They're all rival to be a leading stock exchange, and nobody will ever be, because nobody will ever not even get close to where the NASDAQ is. I don't think we're going to, I would love to. I don't think I'm going to see in my lifetime a tech European unified stock exchange, but, something we can hope for. So right now, let's try to fix what we can fix, which is, seed, Series A, early growth. Let's try to cooperate with larger, markets to come in at growth stage. And if companies list on the NASDAQ right now, I think is the best outcome they can do in terms of listing. And if they get acquired by a huge US company, also great. But I think if we can get a few that stay local and irrespective of maybe dual list, they continue to exist locally and spin out angels, create wealth. I think because we're a lot bigger than, say, Israel, which has done it really well for their size, I think that over the next 20 years, we can play a leading position and in the global venture capital ecosystem. But I think it needs to come a lot from us as operators, rather than just expecting governments to do it, because unfortunately, governments here have this tendency, maybe from back in the days, to fight each other rather than be collaborative. And so I think we need to lobby for a European tech ecosystem, and we need to lobby for shitty things like universities take 20% not happening. And the more we lobby, the more it's going to happen.
And you mentioned there about Israel having done this particularly well. Is there one particular example of how they've done it well, or a lesson that could be learned or taken from there that you think, if this was one of the keys as to how they did it so well?
Well, they had one thing to their advantage, which was their size was obviously too small for anything, and they didn't really have internal divisions because they're so tiny. So I think that, it was a blessing in disguise, in the sense that, look, we're never going to be a tech titan. We're going to sort of, attach ourselves to the US exit market and growth market. So we grow high-tech companies local, and then they retain a strong presence here, ideally, but we push them to the US as they grow and exit. Now, I think Europe has actually a potential to not necessarily copy that, but as of now, until I see more signs that we actually want to build a strong, late growth and exit market locally, effectively on a one-to-one basis, I still advise founders to play their role book here, because we've seen when a unicorn goes public on a local stock exchange here compared to what it would have happened if it went in the US, the difference in capital they can tap in is so big. And it's not just about going public. Again, it's also like the culture of corporates. I mean, we've got some extremely valuable and extremely successful local corporations here. I'm not going to mention names, but we all know, right? In computing, for example, who they are. And you compare them with what NVIDIA is doing in terms of investing in other startups. And it's all selfish, right? They do it for their own interest. But even that selfishness here is misguided. And people just think secretly, they struggle to do. I mean, we need more CVCs, we need more activity, we need more people putting money back in the ecosystem. And the thing is, they shouldn't do it out of altruistic reason. In the US, they do it because it goes back to their bottom line. But even that insight here, we've got so many industries in the sort of, people that are coming from the world from the last century, they're only now starting to use family offices as a tool to invest in venture capital, but too slow, too little risk taken. And I think, that's the part where I'm trying to lobby people towards and invite people to come to events. We're doing one in Italy, for example, next month with some family offices locally to try and, again, just get them exposures to this venture capital asset class that needs more funding, needs more lobbying across the whole of Europe, not just in a little region, a little cluster, a little thing,
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine one of the reasons that a lot of people are reticent, and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but people are reticent to move into deep tech or, that VC asset class from a family office perspective, is a lack of knowledge, but also a misconception of the risk profile. I mean, it is a slightly higher risk profile, right, to invest in deep tech. And we've talked a little bit about that. But if you were kind of educating people on it, how would you help them to learn to mitigate that risk as much as possible?
So more than more risk, I would talk about different risk, as in, so for instance, I actually feel very unable, almost. I really feel like I'm not very good at picking the winner in non-deep tech companies,
Right.
because my education, the way I look at stuff, if I think a market is big enough and I think people are great in terms of the team they've built, my competitor analysis, normally I can do it in the sort of one palm of my hand, and because there are not many people in the world that are trying to crack that problem. I recently posted about it that, say, for example, in quantum, I mean, you look on global companies in quantum, startups that have got some funding, some actual stuff, not just someone deciding to do a company, they're like maybe a couple of hundred of like reasonable, actually creating something. It's actually, this is an entire industry, right? And I mean, I'm going by sort of Crunchbase, deal room type of data. So, obviously, it might not be extremely accurate, but if you compare it to, say, like how many, apps, well-being apps, are in the world, just apps, right? It's just insanely bigger. And this, we're talking about an entire cluster of technology. So, on one side, there is a technical risk, but I see as matching up the fact that there is very little market risk if successful, and especially if we include companies that might not eventually become this titanic success, but they still build IP, they have some clients, they have some tractions, and anyway, deep tech companies can start to have revenue relatively early on in their life. Obviously, it's not self-sustaining. Profitability is nowhere near, and it's not for all cases. But you've got companies, even, high deep science companies that can start to do joint development agreements with corporates that are interested in what they're building and retaining the IP. So, that way you keep, building the product. There are some grants that are collaborative. So again, it's part grant, part revenue. And then there are some actual sales, especially for companies that build hardware that eventually needs to get a lot bigger and maybe a lot more complex, but they can start to service an industry. Like right now in defense, we're seeing it in the drone space, where maybe companies want to take on an entire aviation segment or in the entire aviation industry, but they're starting maybe servicing the drones market, which they can actually sell into relatively early in their lives. So anyway, so you've got all these things that basically to me mean that more than more risk, it's a different type of risk. So you need to be basically more comfortable taking technical risks, as long as you're looking at companies, because otherwise I think they're more science projects than companies, where you can compare them to few things that corporates are trying to do or that other startups are trying to do, and there are not many of these attempts worldwide, so that you can actually start to reference what makes this company different compared to others. I mean, we're finishing now, sort of work on a company that will probably be at this point our next investment, because it's so close that where effectively there's only basically one main competitor. Like just one, right? And the thing is, I think my guys are gonna win at this point. I'm so close to writing the check, but even if they didn't, the market is probably big enough for two people, right? So you see what I'm saying? So different types of risks.
Yeah. That makes sense. And often because I suppose the problems that they're solving are much harder. It's not it's not low-hanging fruit, right? There are only a limited number of people that are qualified and have the ambition and the drive to actually try to solve that problem. So yeah, you mentioned you've got 7 companies in the portfolio at the moment. Is that right? And you mentioned one of them. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I mean, over the summer we actually closed some companies, so now we're at 9.
Oh, at 9. Okay, fab. And you mentioned one of them attaining 40 million revenue and being a sort of success story of yours. Talk me through what do those startups have in common, and are there certain themes either in the founder profile or in the way that they're building the business or in the commercial traction that they had? What are there certain themes really that you think made them outliers in your opinion?
Right. So basically, the 40 million one is my angel portfolio. So across my angel and fund, I've got 15 investments as myself personally, and then another 9 now in the fund. So got a little bit more companies, but fund wise, it's 9. Actually, yes. So I do see some trades. I can never be sure if it's survivor bias, and you always need to be careful about that. You will never know for sure. So just a little bit. But between the 26 pitch winners that we had between 2016 and 2019 with the community, where I wasn't an investor yet, then I started to write my first checks in 2020. So I started to then count that as my portfolio. And then basically January last year, we started investing with the fund. And now we have 9 portfolio companies in there. And across this whole thing, the further back we go, the more we see companies mature. But then again, because at the time I wasn't an investor, back in the community days, I had maybe, in some cases, I still retain good relationship with the founders. In others, maybe it's less so. So it's a little bit more fuzzy. And also in the angel portfolio is the same. The further back they go, maybe my checks were smaller. I was less involved with the companies. I would say, including the company you mentioned, the high revenue, there is definitely something about the founder or founders being, everybody uses the word driven, so I'm going to try to use something more specific, like nutcases. They literally need to be, to an extent, like able to, this is something I've been telling LP, so I'm going to repurpose it here. So there is like a weird, in my view, balance between being strongly opinionated to the point of being polarizing, especially in their area of expertise, but then also extremely inviting of feedback and support in others. And I think you've got some people that are too stubborn, as in like they have an idea and they don't realize, and they don't talk maybe to people as much, that they're not able to listen to advice, or at least they need to learn that, and by smashing their face a little bit more. And then you've got other people that actually are too eager to please people, and so they almost adapt, and so they listen too much. And I think this is a very important skills, because over time, as you raise funds, you build boards, you build advisories around you, and you're gonna start to get contradictory feedback. I got that experience raising the fund. Initially, nobody even gives you feedback. Then you start to get feedback where you can easily action on it, and then that feedback starts to become more and more varied. And somebody gave me this piece of advice, which now I integrated into my diligence with founders, which is, that's actually a great point of maturity. The moment that you're able to start to discern different feedbacks and start to say, well, I cannot do these 2 things at once, I need to choose, then that choice becomes what tests you as a great founder. And I think, again, what I'm looking for in this type of people is the ability for them to start with something, actually go headlong into it, and steamroll ahead, again, bit crazy almost, have these like visions that almost like bend things to their wills no matter what, go through walls. But at the same time, they're saying, well, look, in here, I'm not going to change my mind. I think you're wrong. I don't care if you're an investor, and if you don't want to ever talk to me, I don't care. On this point, I'm not conceding. But all here, for example, I don't know, I've never built a company before, or I built a company in a different space, I need more networking, this, whatever that may be, they're actually very proactive at asking you for help and almost letting others work for you as much as they can. And they're asking smart questions, for instance. They're not just pitching you, they're also trying to assess whether you would be a good person to come on board, which is great, because unfortunately, especially for a small fund, and the angels, I guess, is the same. I've learned, through my own pain, that not all investors are equal, and some investors make more damage than others. Make more damage than good. And so I've started to say no to rounds where it's too much, it's too big of a round, it's too complex of a round. There are too many parties that are not aligned with my vision and the vision that I believe founders should have. And so if founders compromise for certain things and they take on board players who I don't think are aligned, I'd rather not invest, because it almost like invalidates everything I believe the founder could be if they start to bend on certain things. And they bring on board investors that might give them a lifeline for an extra few months, but the deal itself doesn't seem to be pushing the founder to grow for huge success later on. It almost feels like you're minimizing risks in the short term, which I don't think is how you should play venture capital.
No, fair enough. That's interesting. That very fine line then between that obsessive, single-minded determinism, as well as the ability to kind of filter and take on the right feedback at the right time, and knowing, when to stick and when to bend. And very hard to determine that in a founder right up front, because I suppose that's something that only becomes apparent over a period of time. It can be quite hard to know that a founder is definitely like that at the beginning, or people change and evolve as they go on that journey. But as you've got founders in your portfolio, once they're kind of in the portfolio, what support do you offer them? Because you said there you want to make sure it's the right fit, right, on both sides, and sometimes investors can do more harm than they can good. Where do you add your value? Why are you a good person for them to have on the cap table?
That's a good question, because it's a sort of a self-referential question. I try, first of all, to stay out of their way. And then, again, I think when we're talking about pre-seed and seed companies, for instance, I love safes and ASA in the UK or whatever other type of convertibles around Europe to match that. And some people have been telling me, more like in the when I was pitching the fund to investors, like, oh, don't you lose control? Like the founder can kind of do whatever they want. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I thought about it, but then at such an early stage, if I don't have absolute conviction, and I've not done my checks well enough on the person or the people to believe that she or he will actually, they're so obsessed and so consumed by this company that would do whatever it takes to make it successful, that the moment you give them 100K, they basically try to like make something dodgy about it, and they need a board to supervise them rather than focus on building the company. Again, we're talking pre-seeds, right? Then I think I'm not the right stage. I see it as my check as being whatever helps someone to go into a more formal seed round. Or if I'm part of a seed round, again, I'm just going to be there to serve as maybe the filter between the more institutional investors that have a certain agenda and the founders. So again, I'm always a WhatsApp away. But the first kind of, almost commandment that I have is like, thou shalt not bother the founder when they don't need your help, and let them ask for help. Obviously offer. So for example, I network a lot through the community that I've built, and I keep growing, and the actual process of raising and improving the fund. And so whenever I can make a connection to another investor, that helps. And then it depends also on the investors I meet. So I had cases where I've been able to do more than others. In one case, the founder told me, you brought the most capital from just introductions than anyone else in the pre-seed round, and in other cases I've only been able to make a few. It depends. Again, I try to do what I can. I'm always open to give feedback. In one case, I helped a founder restructure their company, and I was there to support him in his darkest periods. So almost like, because I knew that sometimes I've been there with the fund. Sometimes you just need someone to talk to. It doesn't matter actually what advice you give. You probably don't even need to give advice. You just need to be there and listen and say like, look, just keep going. I'm backing you. That's kind of my role. Once they raise a much larger round, I think we're for now too small to overthink about our purpose. But this is fund one. We want to grow as much as they want to grow. So we'll see in future funds how this morphs.
Yeah, absolutely. But predominantly do no harm, stay out the way, trust them, and then be there at the end of a WhatsApp or the end of the phone or email if and when they need you.
Yeah, exactly. That can be actually very valuable. In one case, for example, one founder told me, oh, thank you so much. And I was like, why? Well, because I knew that like you would sign this document quickly. So over holiday, he texted me, hey, this is very important, needs to be done today. You're the only investor that would do it, because every other, including the lead investor, will need to get IC approval. So sometimes, little things like this can help. And that's kind of my role, is to be that nimble super angel, where it's like, when it was just me personally, I would write maybe 10, 20K checks, which is helpful. But then again, I have a personal life to run alongside and whatever, and it's not meaningful. Right now, I'm more in the sort of, 100 to 50K. And so I'm meaningful enough in the earlier stage. And when I'm not needed, I don't need to bother. But, the founder knows that I can always be there. And I try to, every now and again, if I don't hear for a little while, to get in touch, because it's good to sometimes just proactively offer. They might just be under the water with so much, and just being, but just someone that says, hey, look, I'm doing a few events in your space or whatever, just, how's it going? And they might just say, oh, by the way, do you know a good engineer or whatever? And then I could help, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you have a really strong ethos of building your business, building your fund in public, right? And that's a really core part of your journey, right? And what you're all about, and following you, that's really clear for anyone that follows you on LinkedIn. Why is it such an important thing to you, and how do you hope that will benefit others?
Well, two reasons. One, altruistic, one selfish. So the selfish one is because I'm a complete outsider. I never even worked in venture. And so, I realized that it's a very close ecosystem, and since it's so difficult to penetrate, now I'm getting better, because again, I'm writing checks. People are starting to actually value what I'm doing. I remember another VC that told me, look, the first time I saw you, I thought you were crazy and didn't think much of you. Now it's like 4 years that I see you showing up at events even before you had your fund. So I know that I'll see you for another 10. Now I'm happy to make introductions for you, which is like, It's funny and sad at the same time. But anyway, this is the state of Europe today. But on the other end, you've got the altruistic reason, which is when I started, I literally could not even get information about how to do the fund. And then a few people made some good intros, and even, like, for example, I have this couple of guys, Lomax and Andrew. They created this group of people, small community of emerging managers, and they did an event in London that was super affordable. I mean, conference cost you like 2-3K. I can't even pay for them. Thankfully, now they invite me to speak, so it's helpful. Again, early days, I was just not even sure where to start. I didn't know if I should wear a suit or not. My first event I went to in the industry, I went all suited up, and then realized that's not the right thing, which is good for me. But I wasn't even sure, right?
And so
exactly, I'm trying to give back, in the sense that those few things, even though in Europe we're lagging behind in terms of networking, introducing, being helpful to each other, I think, and we need to do more to just be more open. I think people think, oh, these are my investors, this is my thing, and it's a shame, because actually it's not. I don't think people, if they would not invest in you if they invest in someone else, or vice versa. So some people did that for me back in the days. I want to give back to as many people as possible, because again, I believe that if somebody gets advantage from, there's a good chance that they will give back. It happened actually once that I met someone at an event that says, oh, actually, you published something on a deck. It was very useful for my deck. And then they made an intro to an LP, which was like, I never even met you, right? So if it helps, it's great. Look, do whatever you want. If you never want to give back, it's fine. But at least, I'm helping back.
Big karma. And I like that ethos of sort of democratizing the access, democratizing the information, like demystifying it for people, so that it doesn't seem this kind of closed door, opaque elite thing over here that other people can't access. I think that's really useful, especially, if you want to encourage more people into the space, right, and to build it. And just a question on your kind of view of the market, I guess, for this year, and your view going into next year, because you said you've been doing this. You wrote your first check in 2020. You said, write your first personal angel check.
Yeah.
So you've seen the market through some really interesting years, right? 2020, I think we all know what happened there. 2021 and 2022 being, real boom years for investment. 2023 being notoriously tough. And this year, in my opinion, feels better than last year, but we're still not where we were. What's your view for the world of deep tech investment and the market for deep tech investment having been this year? How have you found 2024 to this point? And what are your expectations for how the market will develop end of this year and into 2025? I appreciate you don't have a crystal ball, but
I mean, there is one thing that I'm still not clear about, which is, COVID created massive disruptions around the world, and yet the market became even crazier, booming, I guess, because of all the 20 years of monetary policy added on top of the helps that were handed out during COVID. Then after that, we've seen inflation, changing direction, interest, and it felt like the market corrected, but actually now it's peaking again. But it's peaking again only around a few companies. And then obviously what happens in the public market tends to sort of be a representation of the sentiment people have around the world, and which means that also impacts in it takes longer because private markets are opaque, and until there is a round or an acquisition or something, things don't actually get priced in. So I'm still not sure at a macro level whether we're out of a bad period and therefore into a growth period, or whether actually that was almost, it wasn't allowed to fully explode and we didn't have the crisis that we should have had. And so there's still pain, kept behind, and almost like a volcano that did a small explosion, but it wasn't the real full explosion. And then, it's going to destroy Pompeii right down the line. I'm not sure whether it was the explosion was let out enough to make enough pain to then restart building. So that is potential. I would say, maybe 25%. We might actually crash in a much more violent way in the next 2-3 years. But if that doesn't happen, then in that case, I think right now is the best time ever, because the fact that there was a boom and a bust, it created, and this is actually also in the US, which is great because they lead. It created a sentiment of people wanting to see results a lot earlier, which for a small investor like us is great, because there is this consensus amongst both investors and founders that everybody wants to roll up their sleeves and realize, listen, we've lived too much on fat fees and exits and whatever built on paper value. Now we want to show real value, and that's great because that means that founders are earlier on building revenue. And again, maybe in deep tech is not initially revenue that will make it self-sustaining, but at least it proves to the founders the customer actually want it, and they can bring relation. And corporates realize that if they want to work with startups, they can't just afford forever to do unpaid pilots endlessly, because otherwise the startups would die. So they need to start to give some money, and the investors know that they want to request more visible, practical milestones and more sensible valuation. So everybody in the chain is benefiting. Now, I think two things can happen at this point. Either we're heading for more of a crash at some point, which will reset stuff. I think out of all the bad that will come from something like that, deep tech is well positioned, because you can't erase big problems even if there is a financial crisis. We still need food, we still need agriculture, we still need energy and everything else, and computing and whatever. And if that doesn't happen, again, we will eventually end up in a bubble again at some point, but there's still a long way, I think, before people get back into that crazy mindset of, I'll just throw money at WeWork even if it never makes any profit type of thing, And I think that's great, because, you will avoid sort of going too crazy initially, and then, we'll see what happens in 15 years.
Yeah. And I think we've seen when the problems that are being solved are existential problems, like, climate and energy and food, as you mentioned, I think the determination, the will, the government support is there when we need it. And we've seen that with COVID. So hopefully in markets like those, as you said, there will be more resilience, there'll be more stability, because they're too bigger problems to be allowed to fail, right? But yeah, I think interesting that you say you were building from that kind of stronger base now, because the expectations of the deliverables and the milestones and the commercial traction that these companies should have early on is much higher than it was 2-3 years ago. So hopefully, building from a stronger base with more companies that will last the course and generate better returns, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell us what you're excited about for the rest of this year. And also, crucially, how anyone that's listening, if they are a pre-seed or a seed stage founder that is raising, how they could get in touch with you.
Well, so we've got the Deep Tech Demo Day coming up, this virtual, pan-European, exercise where we've got over 60 VCs already signed up to support. And the way it works is that in September, startups will just be able to apply. I'll make sure to post heavily on LinkedIn, so just make sure you follow and you'll see it. And then basically, startups will apply. And the good thing is that even if they don't get selected for the final, which will be a weighted average of VCs, we've done it last year. It's similar to our competitions that we used to do in person in London, but now it's on a much bigger scale and with more people to make it more impartial. Then investors will still be able to request an intro. And for example, last year we had 50 investors, just over, and we made over 100 intros, which again, crucially, didn't just go to the finalists. So obviously they get the best visibility, but even people that simply applied, maybe an investor invest only in climate, and maybe they saw a climate company that didn't make it to the top, but they were personally very interested, and so they were able to, make ask for an intro. And so yeah, I'm just building that both for the founders, for the growth of the community, and for other investors to notice that this is, by the way, open. It's only for European founders, but it's open to investors from all over the world. We already got US investors signed up, and I guess the idea is, let's focus on building. It's kind of the pre-seed to the A area in deep tech. Let's make sure we nail it, and then for growth, let's build together. And right now, this is the thing that I'm most excited about, because I have last year invested out of some of the companies that were there, so I'm doing it also because I'm watching.
Yeah, exciting. And do you know when in September that is yet? Is there a date set for it?
No, so during September, people would just be able to apply.
Okay.
And then in November, there's actually going to be both a virtual, for the finalists, a virtual pitching event, and then in person. We managed to get sponsors this year, so there's going to be an in-person actual get-together where founders, even from outside of the UK, will be able to come and meet some of the decision makers of the funds that do the scoring. Again, with this idea of building more community, and then in general, we do in-person events ongoingly. So. Even if you're ever around London, check if Silicon Roundabout is doing a meetup, and if not, just sign up to our newsletters and keep track of what we do. If you're a founder or a fellow investor, or you've got to get exposure to the asset class. But now the first fund is closed, but at some point I'm going to go out pitching again. So
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. So follow you on LinkedIn, follow Silicon Roundabout and Silicon Roundabout Ventures on LinkedIn to get all of the updates about the Deep Tech Demo Day and all of the other in-person events happening across London.
Yeah.
Cool. Lovely. Well, Francesco, thank you so much for joining me today and spending your lunchtime with me and sharing all of that knowledge and information and experience with our listeners. I hugely appreciate it.